I never expected to find my father's last words in the false bottom of his old cigar box. Not on what was supposed to be a simple afternoon of sorting through his belongings with my fiancé Callum, but there it was, a cream-colored envelope with my name written in Dad's distinctive scrawl. My name is Rowan, and until that moment, I thought I had processed my grief over losing my father 6 months ago. I was wrong. "What's that, darling?" Callum asked, peering over my shoulder as I held the envelope. His cologne, usually comforting, felt suddenly overwhelming in the stuffy attic of my childhood home. "I'm not sure." My fingers trembled as I traced Dad's handwriting. It was hidden in his favorite cigar box. Callum reached for the envelope, but I instinctively pulled it closer. Something about finding this letter, this secret, made me want to keep it to myself. Just for a moment. "Come on, love. Share with the class," he said with that charming smile that usually melted my defenses. But not this time. "I think I need some air," I managed, already heading for the attic stairs. "Could you finish boxing up the rest?" I didn't wait for his response. My heels clicked against the hardwood as I made my way to Dad's study, the one room in the house that still felt like him. The leather chair creaked as I sat behind his massive oak desk, the envelope now feeling heavier than it should. Inside, I found 2 pages filled with Dad's precise handwriting. "My dearest Rowan, if you're reading this, then either I'm gone or you've become as nosy as your mother. I'm betting on the former, though I hope I'm wrong. There are things I need to tell you, things I should have said while I was alive. But timing and courage failed me, and now I can only hope this letter finds you before it's too late. You're probably wondering why I hid this letter. The truth is, I've discovered something that changes everything, about our family's legacy, about the people close to you, and about the fortune everyone thinks I've left behind. Trust your instincts, sweetheart. They've always been sharper than mine. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Watch carefully those who seem most interested in what I've left behind. Not everything or everyone is what they appear to be. In my office safe combination your birthday, you'll find documents that will explain everything. But be discreet. Share this information with no one except your mother. She knows more than she lets on. Most importantly, remember that real wealth isn't always measured in dollars and cents. Sometimes it's measured in the wisdom to know who to trust. I love you, my girl. Stay strong. Dad." I read the letter 3 times, my heart pounding harder with each pass. What was Dad trying to tell me? And why the secrecy? A floorboard creaked behind me, and I quickly folded the letter, shoving it into my pocket. Callum appeared in the doorway, his smile slightly strained. "Found you," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Everything okay?" "You rushed out rather quickly." "Just needed a moment," I replied, forcing a smile. "Dad stuff, you know? More emotional than I expected." He nodded sympathetically, but something in his eyes made me uneasy. Or maybe it was just Dad's words making me paranoid. "Speaking of your father's things," Callum said, his tone carefully casual. "Have you given any more thought to when we might meet with the estate lawyer? Just to get everything sorted before the wedding." The question seemed innocent enough, but combined with Dad's warning, it hit differently. Why was my fiancé so interested in my father's estate? "Soon," I said vaguely, my hand unconsciously touching the letter in my pocket. "There's still a lot to process." As Callum nodded and turned to leave, I glanced at the painting behind Dad's desk, the one concealing his safe. Whatever secrets lay behind it would have to wait until I was alone. But one thing was certain, nothing about this felt right. And Dad had taught me to trust my gut. I barely slept that night, Dad's letter burning a hole in my thoughts. The next morning, as I opened my boutique, my phone buzzed with a message from Callum. "Mother insists on treating you to lunch. The plaza at 1? She won't take no for an answer." Great. Just what I needed. An afternoon with Gwendolyn Hayes and her surgical smile. The morning crawled by as I helped customers, my mind elsewhere. At 12:55, I walked into the plaza's restaurant, spotting them immediately. Gwendolyn rose to greet me, her designer outfit perfectly coordinated, not a silver hair out of place. "Darling," she air-kissed both my cheeks. "You look exhausted. Wedding planning keeping you up?" "Just busy with the boutique," I said, sliding into my seat. Callum squeezed my hand under the table, but something felt off about his touch. Speaking of the boutique, Gwendolyn said, sipping her martini, Callum tells me you're still operating out of that quaint little space downtown. Have you considered expanding? Now that you'll have access to more resources. I felt my shoulders tense. The current location works perfectly for my needs. But surely with your father's estate settled, Callum began. Which hasn't happened yet. I cut in sharper than intended. The waiter's arrival provided a welcome interruption. Throughout lunch, Gwendolyn steered the conversation repeatedly toward my father's business dealings, each question wrapped in a layer of saccharine concern. Arthur was such a brilliant businessman. He must have taught you so much about investing, dear. Dad believed in learning by doing, I replied carefully. He let me make my own mistakes. How noble, Gwendolyn said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Though I hope he left you better prepared for managing his estate. Such responsibility can be overwhelming for someone used to running a small shop. My phone buzzed, a message from my mother. Need to see you. Important. Come by the house after work. Excuse me, I said, standing abruptly. Emergency at the boutique. I need to go. But we haven't discussed the wedding venue options, Gwendolyn protested. Another time. I grabbed my purse, avoiding Callum's questioning look. As I reached the restaurant's entrance, I realized I'd forgotten my scarf. Turning back, I froze at the sound of their voices from around the corner. She's becoming difficult, Gwendolyn hissed. If she starts digging too deeply before the wedding. I've got it under control, Mother, Callum interrupted. Once we're married, accessing the estate will be simple. Rowan trusts me. Does she? That display just now suggests otherwise. We can't afford another failure, Callum. The bank won't extend. I said I've got it handled, Callum snapped. Just stick to the plan. My hands shook as I pushed through the revolving door into the street. The cool air did nothing to calm the nausea rising in my throat. Dad's warning echoed in my head. Watch carefully those who seem most interested in what I've left behind. At 6, I pulled up to my childhood home, finding Mom in the garden. She looked up from her roses, her expression grave. I found something in Dad's study, she said without preamble. Something you need to see. She led me inside, pulling out a folder filled with bank statements and legal documents. Your father knew something was coming. He started moving assets around 3 months before he died. What are you saying? I'm saying the estate everyone's so interested in? It's not what they think. She hesitated. And Callum's family? They're not who they pretend to be. Mom, what do you know about them? She opened her mouth to answer, but her phone rang, Gwendolyn's name flashing on the screen. Mom declined the call with a grimace. She's been calling all day, wanting to catch up, Mom said. Listen to me carefully, Rowan. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. And whatever you do, don't tell them about. The doorbell rang, cutting her off. Through the front window, I caught a glimpse of Callum's familiar silhouette. Back door, Mom whispered, shoving the folder into my hands. Go. We'll talk tomorrow. As I slipped out through the garden, I heard Callum's voice. Evening, Lila. Is Rowan here? We need to discuss the wedding plans. I clutched the folder to my chest, my engagement ring suddenly feeling like a dead weight on my finger. What exactly had I gotten myself into? I spent the night poring over the documents Mom had given me, each page revealing another crack in the perfect facade of my life. By morning, my dining room table looked like a crime scene investigation, with papers spread everywhere and my father's letter propped against an empty wine glass. The doorbell rang at 7 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw Mom, looking like she hadn't slept either. You need to see this, she said, brushing past me with a laptop. I've been up all night digging through your father's old emails. The Hayes family, they've done this before. She pulled up article after article. Different names, different cities, but the same pattern. Wealthy families, sudden marriages, mysterious bankruptcies. They're not even using their real names, Mom said, her voice tight. Gwendolyn Hayes was Gwendolyn Porter 5 years ago. And Callum? My phone buzzed. Callum's face lit up the screen. Don't answer, Mom whispered. I let it go to voicemail, but my hands were shaking. I need to check the safe, I said. Dad's safe in his study. He mentioned it in the letter. 20 minutes later, we stood in Dad's study. I entered my birthday into the safe's keypad, hearing the satisfying click. Inside, we found more documents, a USB drive, and a small red notebook. Your father's private ledger, Mom said, reaching for it. The front door opened downstairs. Callum's voice echoed through the house. Rowan? Your car's outside. Are you here? Mom shoved the notebook into my hands. Backstairs. Go. I'll handle him. I slipped out just as Callum's footsteps reached the study. Lila. I didn't expect to find you here. My house, remember? The better question is why you're here, letting yourself in without knocking. Their voices faded as I made my way through the garden. In my car, I opened the notebook with trembling fingers. Numbers, dates, and names filled the pages. But one entry made my blood run cold. Hayes connection confirmed. Same group from the Morrison case. Protecting Rowan must come first. My phone buzzed again, a text from Callum. Where are you? We need to talk about the wedding. Mother's worried you're having doubts. Another text followed. By the way, did you remove anything from your father's study? Some papers seemed to be missing. The calm mask I'd been wearing cracked. I started my car and drove to the one place I could think clearly, my boutique. But as I unlocked the door, I found Gwendolyn waiting inside. Security let me in, she said smoothly. We need to talk, dear. How did you know you'd come here? You're so like your father, always retreating to work when things get complicated. Her smile turned sharp. He did the same thing, right before he died. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. What do you know about my father's death? Only that stress can do terrible things to a person's heart. She examined her manicured nails. Especially when they're trying to protect certain secrets. My phone buzzed again. Callum, found the safe open. Mother's waiting at your shop. Let's talk this through like family. Gwendolyn continued. Marriages are about trust. About sharing everything, including burdens, secrets, inheritances. I thought about Dad's warning, about Mom's discoveries, about the notebook burning a hole in my bag, about all the signs I'd ignored because I wanted to believe in love. You're right, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Let's talk about trust. And about the Morrison case. Gwendolyn's perfectly composed face flickered for just a moment. I don't know what you're. Or should I call you Mrs. Porter? I pulled out my phone, showing her the articles Mom had found. That was your name when you pulled this same scam in Seattle, wasn't it? The shop's door chimed. Callum walked in, his face dark. Rowan, whatever you think you know. I know enough, I cut him off, backing toward my office. And soon everyone else will too. I hadn't planned what to say next. But as I looked at their faces, Gwendolyn's mask of concern cracking, Callum's charm turning to something uglier, I realized Dad had been preparing me for this moment all along. The question was, what would I do with the truth? I decided to play their game. After the confrontation at my boutique, I pretended to accept Callum's explanations, his promises, his lies. But I kept digging, and what I found made my stomach turn. The USB drive from Dad's safe contained emails, hundreds of them. Correspondence between Dad and someone named Marcus Morrison. As I read through them late one night, my hands started shaking. Arthur, they're getting closer. Gwendolyn Porter and her son have already emptied the Peterson account. Sarah Peterson killed herself last week. We can't let them do this to another family. My phone lit up with a text from Callum. Late meeting. Rain check on dinner. I grabbed my keys and drove to his office building downtown. His car was there, but the lights were off in his window. The security guard recognized me. Mr. Hayes left about an hour ago with a woman. Headed toward the Archer Hotel. The Archer. Of course. Where else would you take your secret girlfriend while your fiancé sits at home, reading about how you destroyed other families? I found his car in the hotel parking lot. Sitting there, watching the entrance, I felt oddly calm, like everything was finally making sense. The rushed engagement, the constant questions about Dad's estate, the way he always changed the subject when I mentioned prenuptial agreements. My phone buzzed. Mom, don't do anything rash. Come home. There's more you need to know. But I was already walking into the hotel, Dad's voice echoing in my head. Trust your instincts. The desk clerk didn't even hesitate when I mentioned being Callum's fiancé. Oh yes, Mr. Hayes is in the bar with Miss Peterson. Peterson. Like Sarah Peterson, who killed herself. They were sitting in a corner booth, heads close together. The woman was young, beautiful, and wearing an engagement ring that looked exactly like mine. I walked straight to their table, phone recording in my pocket. Callum, darling. Funny running into you here during your late meeting. He jumped like he'd been shocked. Rowan. I can explain. Let me guess, I said, turning to the woman. He told you about his family's investment firm? About how he could help manage your inheritance. And of course, he fell madly in love with you along the way. The woman's face went pale. Who are you? I'm his fiancé. One of them anyway. And I'm guessing you're related to Sarah Peterson. My sister, she whispered. How did you? Because my father tried to stop them before they killed her. I pulled out my phone, showing her the emails. They've done this before. Multiple times. Callum's charm vanished, replaced by something cold and hard. You've been going through private documents? Funny how you're more worried about that than being caught with your other fiancé. He grabbed my arm, fingers digging in. Let's discuss this privately. Take your hand off her. The new voice belonged to a man standing behind us, tall, gray-haired, familiar from photos in Dad's emails. Marcus Morrison. Miss Everly, he said, your father asked me to watch over you if anything happened to him. I've been waiting for you to figure it out. Callum's grip tightened. This is a private matter. Actually, said another voice mom, walking in with 2 police detectives, it's now a criminal matter. Fraud, theft, and conspiracy charges tend to be very public. Callum released my arm, his face twisting. You don't understand. My mother is already in custody, one detective said. We picked her up trying to access your father's business accounts 20 minutes ago. As they led Callum away, I sat down heavily in the booth. The other woman, Peterson's sister, was crying quietly. I almost fell for it too, I told her. They're very good at what they do. Mom sat beside me, holding my hand. Your father would be proud. He spent years trying to expose them. Did they? I couldn't finish the question. We can't prove they caused your father's heart attack, Marcus said quietly. But the stress of trying to protect you from them certainly didn't help. I twisted my engagement ring off my finger, feeling its weight one last time. Then let's finish what Dad started. The ring clattered onto the table, and with it, the last of my illusions about love and trust. But something stronger was taking their place, a determination to make things right, to protect others from falling into the same trap. Dad had tried to warn me. Now it was my turn to warn others. The morning after Callum's arrest, I sat in Marcus Morrison's office, surrounded by evidence of my father's secret crusade. Files, photos, and financial records covered every surface, each telling a story of another family destroyed by the Hayes schemes. Your father wasn't just tracking them, Marcus said, sliding a thick folder across his desk. He was building a case. But he needed absolute proof of their connection to Sarah Peterson's death. I opened the folder, finding photographs of Callum with different women, all wearing similar engagement rings. All from wealthy families. All now bankrupt or worse. Why didn't Dad just go to the police? Marcus's expression darkened. He tried. But Gwendolyn had connections in high places. Each time we got close, charges would mysteriously disappear. Witnesses would recant. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. We should talk. About Arthur. About what really happened to him. Gee. Gwendolyn, I whispered, showing Marcus the message. He reached for his phone, but I stopped him. Wait. Maybe we should hear what she has to say. It's too dangerous. Dad died trying to stop them. I need to know why. The county jail's visiting room was cold and sterile. Gwendolyn sat across from me, her designer outfit replaced by an orange jumpsuit, but her composure remained intact. I knew you'd come, she said, studying me. You have your father's curiosity. His determination. It's what got him killed, you know. My hands clenched under the table. What do you mean? Arthur was getting too close. He'd discovered our offshore accounts, our connections to certain influential people. People who couldn't afford exposure. She leaned forward. But he made a mistake. He tried to warn the wrong person. Who? Check his calendar for March 15th. The day before his heart attack. Her smile turned predatory. But be careful, dear. Some truths are better left buried. Back at Dad's house, I found his old planner in his desk. March 15th had a single entry. Dinner, Judge Matthews. My blood ran cold. Judge Matthews, The same judge who had dismissed 3 cases against the Hayes family. Mom appeared in the doorway. I was hoping you wouldn't find that. You knew. Your father told me everything the night before he died. He was going to expose Judge Matthews' connection to Gwendolyn. But someone warned them. I stared at her, realization dawning. The morning of his heart attack, you said he had a breakfast meeting with his old friend from the DA's office. Mom's voice cracked. Who happened to be Judge Matthews' brother-in-law? My phone buzzed again, Marcus. Found something in the offshore accounts. Come quickly. At his office, Marcus pulled up financial records on his computer. Look at these transfers. The morning of Arthur's death, someone moved millions between accounts. But the signature algorithm matches. Matches what? Your boutique's corporate account. Someone used your business to launder their money. And the authorization. He pointed to a familiar name on the screen. My heart stopped. The authorization came from my accountant, the one Callum had recommended when we got engaged. They were setting me up, I whispered. If Dad had exposed them, you would have gone down too. Marcus ran a hand through his gray hair. Arthur figured it out too late. He had to choose between exposing them and protecting you. My phone buzzed one last time. Another unknown number, like father, like daughter. Back off or history repeats itself. Some hearts just can't take the strain. I thought about Dad, about his final choice, about the legacy he left me, about justice and revenge, and the fine line between them. We need to end this, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Not just for Dad, but for everyone they've hurt. Marcus nodded grimly. But they're watching you now. One wrong move. Then we'll give them exactly what they're watching for. I pulled out Dad's notebook, flipping to the last page. Dad left a plan. A way to trap them all. Judges, lawyers, everyone. But it's risky. How risky? I met his eyes. I'll have to die first. The plan was insane. Dangerous. Probably illegal. But as I thought about Sarah Peterson, about my father, about all the lives destroyed by greed and corruption, I knew there was no other choice. Sometimes to serve justice, you have to be willing to lose everything. The plan was simple. Fake my own death, make it look like another victim of the Hayes family schemes. But nothing prepares you for reading your own obituary. Tragic accident claims local businesswoman. The headline read. The article detailed how I'd apparently driven my car off Clayton Bridge after discovering irregularities in my boutique's finances. The same bridge where Sarah Peterson had died. I watched the funeral from Marcus's car, parked far enough away to stay hidden. Mom knew the truth, of course, she had to. But watching her pretend to grieve, seeing the real tears of my employees and friends, it felt like dying for real. Callum showed up in a perfectly tailored black suit, playing the devastated fiancé. Even from a distance, I could see him working the crowd, probably already sizing up his next target. They're taking the bait, Marcus said, checking his phone. Judge Matthews just called an emergency meeting with Gwendolyn's lawyer. But something felt wrong. Callum was too composed, too calculated in his movements. Like he was performing for someone. That night, I snuck into my boutique's office, using the back entrance key I'd never turned in. I needed to check the safe to make sure the evidence we'd planted was still there. The office door was already unlocked. I was wondering when you'd show up. Callum sat in my chair, his feet propped on my desk. Behind him stood Judge Matthews and 2 men I didn't recognize. You really are your father's daughter, Callum said, smiling that charming smile I'd once loved. He tried the same trick. Faking evidence, planning his big reveal. Right up until his heart gave out. Gave out. I kept my voice steady. You mean until you made it give out. Potassium chloride, one of the unknown men said. Untraceable in most toxicology reports. Especially when the victim has a history of heart problems. My blood ran cold. They hadn't just let Dad die, they'd murdered him. The question is, Judge Matthews said, what should we do with you? You can't touch me, I said. Everything's already been sent to the FBI. No, Callum replied, it hasn't. Because Marcus Morrison won't be delivering anything to anyone. My phone buzzed. A photo appeared, Marcus's car, wrapped around a tree. Another accident. You see, Callum continued, standing, we own this city. The police, the judges, even some of those federal agents you were counting on. Your father never understood that. But you will. The two men moved to block the door. Judge Matthews pulled out a small vial. The thing about faking your death, Callum said, is that sometimes it becomes real. I backed away, but my heel caught on the carpet. As I stumbled, I caught a glimpse of movement outside the office window, a flash of gray hair. Before you kill me, I said, playing for time, don't you want to know where the real evidence is? Callum's smile faltered. What real evidence? Dad's backup plan. The one even Marcus didn't know about. I forced a laugh. Did you really think he'd trust everything to one person? The men exchanged glances. Judge Matthews stepped forward. Where is it? In a safe deposit box. Time locked. If I don't enter the code every 24 hours, everything goes public. She's bluffing, Callum snapped, but uncertainty crept into his voice. A siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. Maybe I am, I said. Want to risk it? Because this time, I made sure everyone would know exactly who to blame for my death. The sirens were definitely heading our way now. Judge Matthews grabbed Callum's arm. We need to go. Now. They rushed out the back door, just as police cars screeched to a stop outside. Mom burst in through the front, followed by FBI agents. Real ones this time. Marcus? I asked. Safe, Mom said, hugging me. He called us as soon as he spotted them following you. I sagged against her, the adrenaline draining away. We'd gotten what we needed. Judge Matthews and his thugs on camera, confessing to Dad's murder. But Callum had slipped away again. He'll be back, I said, watching the agents photograph the vial they'd left behind. He won't be able to help himself. Mom squeezed my hand. Then we'll be ready. But as I stood in my darkened office, surrounded by evidence of how deep the corruption went, I wondered if anyone could ever really be ready for what was coming next. 3 days after the confrontation at my boutique, Callum walked right into our trap. He showed up at Dad's estate auction, the one I'd arranged to settle outstanding debts. The great room was packed with potential buyers, but I spotted him immediately, lurking near the back. He'd grown careless, desperate, just as Dad's notes predicted he would. Law 156, the auctioneer announced. Arthur Everly's private safe contents, unopened. Bidding starts at $50,000. Callum's hand shot up immediately. No surprise there. He thought Dad's evidence was inside. I let him win the bid. Congratulations, sir, I said, approaching him afterward. Would you like to open it now? His eyes narrowed. You're supposed to be dead. Sorry to disappoint. Again. I gestured to the safe. Shall we? He followed me to a private room, where Marcus and Mom waited with the FBI agents. But Callum just smiled. That familiar, confident smile that once made me trust him. You still don't get it, do you? He pulled out his phone. One call and certain judges will make sure that all evidence disappears. I opened the safe. Like this evidence? Inside lay a single envelope, addressed to him. What game are you playing? Open it. His hands shook slightly as he tore open the envelope. Inside was a single photo Callum with Judge Matthews, taken the night of Dad's death. There's no proof, he started. Check your phone, Marcus said. Callum's screen lit up with a video security footage from my boutique, showing his entire confession about Dad's murder. Already viral, I said. Every news outlet in the country has it. Judge Matthews was arrested an hour ago. And your mother. I paused. Well, she made a deal. You're lying. But sweat beaded on his forehead. She told him everything, Callum. About Sarah Peterson, about Dad, about all of it. See, that's the thing about people like you and your mother. You never really trust each other. He lunged for the door, but FBI agents blocked his path. One more thing, I said, pulling out Dad's notebook. Remember when I mentioned a safety deposit box? With time-locked evidence. His face went pale. There wasn't one. But you believed it because you knew Dad was smart enough to have a backup plan. Want to know what his real plan was? I opened the notebook to its last page. He knew you'd kill him eventually. Knew you'd come after me next. So he left a trail, breadcrumbs for me to follow, evidence scattered across dozens of accounts and locations, each piece meaningless alone, but together. You're bluffing, he whispered, but his charm had cracked completely. The auction? The safe? All staged. While you were focused on them, FBI agents were raiding every location listed in Dad's notebook. Your entire network is exposed. Callum's composure finally shattered. He spun toward me, rage replacing his usual calculated control. He deserved it. They all deserved it. These self-righteous rich families, looking down on people like us. People like you, I corrected, who think they're entitled to take whatever they want, no matter who they hurt. At least I'm honest about what I am, he snarled. You're no better, playing these games, manipulating people. The difference is I learned from the best. I stepped closer. You taught me how to lie, Callum. How to manipulate. How to make people see what I wanted them to see. I just used it better than you. As the agents led him away, he turned back one last time. Your father was weak. He died afraid. No, Mom said, speaking for the first time. He died protecting what mattered most. That's not weakness. It's the greatest strength there is. I watched them take him away, feeling neither triumph nor satisfaction, just a quiet certainty that Dad would have understood. Marcus touched my shoulder. It's over. But I knew it wasn't. Not completely. There would always be people like Callum, like Gwendolyn, like Judge Matthews. The only question was whether there would be enough people willing to stand against them. Dad had made his choice. Now I'd made mine. 6 months after Callum's arrest, I stood in Dad's study one last time. The house had sold yesterday, but there was one final thing I needed to do. The safe opened with a familiar click. Inside lay a single key I'd never noticed before, taped to the back wall. A sticky note accompanied it, for when you're ready. Dad. Mom appeared in the doorway. I wondered when you'd find that. You knew about it? She nodded. Arthur left instructions. Said you'd know when it was time. The key led us to a small law firm downtown, to a safety deposit box that had been paid up for 50 years. Inside, I found another letter. My dearest Rowan, if you're reading this, then you faced your storm and emerged stronger. I always knew you would. What you found wasn't just about justice. It was about understanding that true strength lies not in revenge, but in protecting others from experiencing the same pain. There's one last thing I need to tell you. The boutique you built? It wasn't just your dream. It was mine too. A legitimate business, built on honest work and real connections. Everything I wished I'd done differently. Check the account number below. It's your real inheritance. Not money from schemes or manipulation, but from 20 years of quiet investments in people who needed second chances. People like us. Use it wisely. Use it kindly. I love you. Dad. The account contained millions, all legitimate, all traceable to small business loans Dad had given over the years. Loans that had been paid back with interest and gratitude. That evening, I sat with Marcus in my boutique, watching the sunset through the windows. Sarah Peterson's sister called, he said. The foundation you started with your father's money? It's already helped 3 families avoid foreclosure. I nodded, thinking of all the other families out there, vulnerable to people like Callum. Dad's letter said strength lies in protection, not revenge. I think I finally understand what he meant. Speaking of Callum, Marcus hesitated. He's offering to testify against the remaining network. Wants a deal. Let him, I said. The truth matters more than punishment. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. Found something else in the study. Come quick. At the house, Mom handed me a small box. Inside was Dad's old watch, the one he always wore. But something was different about it. Press the crown, Mom said. The watch face popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a micro SD card and another note. For the next time someone like them comes along. Because they always do. Love, Dad. I smiled, sliding the card into my phone. More evidence, more names, more connections. Dad's insurance policy for the future. He knew, didn't he? I asked Mom. Knew I'd have to face something like this eventually? He knew you'd be strong enough when you did. She squeezed my hand. The question is, what will you do now? I thought about the foundation, about Dad's network of quiet investments, about all the people still vulnerable to schemes and manipulation. I'm going to do what Dad did, I said. Watch. Protect. Build something real. And if someone else like Callum comes along? I touched the watch, thinking of all it represented. Not just evidence and protection, but a father's love and foresight, a legacy of quiet strength. Then they'll learn what we learned, I said. That real power isn't in taking. It's in giving people the means to protect themselves. As we locked up the house one last time, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. Stronger now, wiser, but still my father's daughter. Still carrying his legacy, but making it my own. The next morning, I opened my boutique early. A young woman waited outside, desperate, afraid, clutching papers that looked suspiciously like the ones Callum used to prepare. "Can you help me?" she asked. "Someone said you might understand." I touched Dad's watch, feeling its weight against my wrist, and opened the door wider. "Come in," I said. "Let's talk about second chances. Some legacies, I've learned, aren't about money or revenge or even justice. They're about the choices we make when facing the darkness, and the light we choose to share afterward. Dad taught me that, and I intend to teach others." "You've got to be joking. The problem is with you. Why haven't you settled the payment for the accommodation?" I asked, my voice shaking with frustration. "Because you're the one who left me," my husband shot back. "Just bring the money here," I demanded. "I'm not going to do that. I'm the one who was left behind," he said coldly. "I didn't even want to go on that trip in the first place. This was just another day in our troubled marriage. My husband and I have been married for 7 years. We have a 6-year-old daughter who is the light of my life. Watching her grow, laugh, and discover the world has been the best part of every single day. But sadly, my relationship with my husband has been falling apart. When my daughter turned 1, I decided to quit my job. It wasn't an easy decision, but I wanted to be there for her as she grew. However, instead of supporting me, my husband made it clear that if I wasn't working, I had to take care of all the housework by myself. So I did it all. I cleaned, cooked, and took care of our baby without any help. When she was a newborn, I barely got any sleep. It was exhausting. I remember one night feeling so drained that I asked my husband to help. His response shocked me. "If you don't like it, I can divorce you anytime," he said without hesitation. He even showed me a set of completed divorce papers. He put them in the drawer right in front of me, as if to remind me that he could leave whenever he wanted. After that, whenever we had an argument, he would pull out those papers and mention divorce, with a disgusted look on his face. And then there's my mother-in-law, the person who raised him to think this way. She's just like him, controlling and critical. She comes over to our house whenever she wants, without asking. One day, she visited unannounced, opened the fridge, and started eating my daughter's yogurt without even asking. But that wasn't the worst of it. Whenever she came over, she would lecture me endlessly about how a proper wife should behave. She'd even inspect the corners of my house for dust and criticize me if she found any. Today, she came over again. "I have good news for you," she said with a big smile. I didn't trust her at all. "What is it?" I asked cautiously. "What's wrong with you? You should look happier when I'm bringing good news," she snapped. "You're so ungrateful, just like my son says." "Okay, what's the news?" I asked, forcing myself to stay calm. "We're going on a trip," she announced proudly. "Where to?" I asked, confused. "It's your job as the unemployed one to figure that out," she said with a smirk. "Honestly, you're really not very smart, are you? It's such a shame." And just like that, she left me feeling small and defeated once again. "I have a surprise for my son, who works so hard all the time," my mother-in-law announced, looking pleased with herself. "A surprise?" I asked, unsure what she meant. "Yes. Let's help him relax and leave behind all his tiredness," she said with a smile. But something in her tone made me feel uneasy. It didn't take long for me to figure out what she meant. My mother-in-law wanted to take her son, my husband, on a trip. The problem? She didn't want to pay for it herself. Instead, she had come up with a plan to invite me and my daughter along. And guess what? She wanted me to cover the entire cost of the trip. Who would want to go on such a trip? Certainly not me. Besides, we simply couldn't afford it. "Let's make it a grand trip," she added cheerfully, acting as if money wasn't an issue. "No. I never said I was going," I replied firmly. "Let me think about this for a while," I added, trying to end the conversation without upsetting her further. That evening, my husband came home from work in a terrible mood. I immediately knew why. My mother-in-law must have called him and told him about our conversation. "I heard you disobeyed my mother today," he said, confronting me as soon as he stepped through the door. "I was just telling her the truth," I replied, feeling defensive. "What truth?" "That we can't take her on vacation," he asked, his voice rising. "That's right. We don't have that kind of money," I admitted, feeling the heavy weight of our financial situation pressing down on me. But he wasn't ready to listen. "My mother said it was a surprise. She already told me about the trip." "What's the surprise in this?" I asked, frustrated. "If we can't manage our finances, how are we supposed to afford a trip?" "It's your fault we can't manage the money," he snapped. "How am I supposed to manage money that we don't even have?" I shot back. "Are you trying to say that I don't make enough?" he asked, clearly offended. "Well, it's not exactly much," I said, unable to hold back my honesty. "You've got to be kidding me," he grumbled. "Anyway, I'm going on this trip. You need to plan everything. That's an order. And if you can't do it, we're getting a divorce." His words cut deep. I felt my heart sink. "I might as well get a divorce now," I muttered quietly under my breath. But as frustrated as I was, one thought kept me from saying more. What will my daughter think? She was the only reason I hadn't walked away already. In the end, I found myself searching for hotels and trying to plan the trip, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. I wasn't even sure about going on the trip, but my mother-in-law kept insisting. After talking with my husband, she became even pickier about her demands. "I want a room with an open-air bathtub," she declared, "and the meals must be the most luxurious ones at the hotel." Her requests seemed endless, and I couldn't help but wonder how much all of this would cost. But if I didn't meet her demands, I knew what would happen. I'd be met with another storm of sarcasm and criticism. It felt like I had no choice but to give in, even though it frustrated me deeply. Finally, I decided to take a bold step. I shamelessly went ahead and fulfilled all of her requests, but the way I managed it wasn't something she expected. When my mother-in-law found out everything was arranged just the way she wanted, she became oddly tense and annoyed. "This is all thanks to my mom," she said, saying something that didn't make much sense. But I ignored it. That evening during dinner, my husband started one of his usual lectures. He had this habit of scolding me over the smallest things, but after 5 years of dealing with it, I had become almost immune. I let him talk and didn't even bother responding. Thankfully, he never used sarcasm or harsh words in front of our daughter. It seemed like he didn't want her to see that side of him, which gave me some relief. The day of the trip finally came. I found myself sitting in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel tightly. Of course, I was the one who rented the car and, naturally, the one doing all the driving. My husband sat comfortably in the passenger seat, acting like he owned the car. In the back seat, my mother-in-law kept talking to herself about souvenirs she wanted to buy, completely ignoring my daughter, who was trying to get her attention. I drove all morning without a single offer of help from either of them. No one asked if I needed a break or if I was tired. Finally, we stopped at a service area because my daughter needed to use the restroom. I quickly took her, relieved for a moment to stretch my legs, and hurried back to the parking lot. But when we returned, the car was gone. I froze, my heart pounding as I looked around the lot. The car was nowhere to be seen. Feeling panicked, I called my husband. He didn't pick up. Next, I tried calling my mother-in-law. "You two took too long," she said with a laugh, her tone cold and uncaring. So we left. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They had actually left us behind. I tried to explain what had happened, but she wasn't interested. It was clear they had no intention of coming back for us. I stood there holding my daughter's hand, wondering what I was going to do next. I had only gone to the bathroom for a few minutes, but when I called my husband to find out why he left, his voice cut through the phone with anger. "This is your fault," he said coldly. "You don't listen to me. You have no right to go on this trip. Was this your plan all along? If so, what now?" I felt my heart sink, but he wasn't done. "I'm fine, but what about Jane? She's turning out just like you, too cocky. She even talked back to my mom when she complained about you. She needs to be punished too." I was stunned. My daughter, Jane, had only stood up for me, and now he wanted to punish her for that. But he added, since she was looking forward to this trip, I might think about it again when you both apologize. If you understand, you can go home now. Before I could respond, he hung up the phone. I stood there in shock, holding the phone in one hand and my daughter's hand in the other. What was I supposed to do now? I realized how far we were from home. Mom, are you okay? Did Dad and Grandma leave us? Jane asked, her small voice breaking the tense silence. I knelt down to her level and forced a smile. I guess so, sweetheart. They're so mean, aren't they? She asked. Yeah, I think so too, I said softly. Are we going home? She asked, tilting her head. I hesitated. Yes. But you were really looking forward to this trip? She smiled sweetly. Only because I was with you, Mom. If you're going home, I'll go home too. Her words warmed my heart. Then let's go on adventure instead, I said, trying to make the best of the situation. An adventure? Jane's eyes lit up, her carefree smile bringing me a sense of peace. I called my friend Millie, who lived nearby, and told her everything that had happened. Without hesitation, she came to pick us up and drove us home. Later that evening, after Jane had fallen asleep, Millie and I sat down to talk. So, what are you going to do now? Millie asked, concern in her eyes. I took a deep breath. I think I'm getting a divorce. Millie nodded. That's a good decision. You've put up with this for far too long. Yeah, I said, feeling a strange sense of relief. And I don't want Jane to grow up with a father who harms her emotionally anymore. The next morning, I signed the divorce papers that had been sitting in the drawer for years. Millie filled in the witness box, and, ironically, my mother-in-law's name was already written in the other box. Thanks to that, I was able to file the papers immediately. 5 days after returning home, my phone rang. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. After dropping my daughter off at kindergarten, I got a call from my husband. His tone was sharp and angry. You've got to be kidding me. You're the one causing all the problems. Why haven't you paid for the hotel accommodation? He demanded. Because you're the one who left me behind, I shot back. You should have paid for it in advance. Oh, really? He sneered. And why does it cost $10,000? That's ridiculous. It costs that much because it includes all the special requests your dear mother made, I replied sarcastically. You and your mother had a great time there, so why don't you split it? That would be $6,000 each. There was silence for a moment, and then I heard a woman's voice in the background. She sounded frustrated, likely someone from the hotel asking for payment. I'll call the police if you don't pay, the woman warned. No problem, my husband responded smugly. My wife will pay. She's on her way here right now. The woman's voice grew colder. Where is your wife now? She asked. At home, my husband answered casually. The woman's tone sharpened. I checked her address, and it seems like your wife is far from home. Didn't you leave her at a service area, and now you're telling her to come and pay? My heart swelled with gratitude when I realized who the woman was. She continued, her voice now directed at him. Excuse me, your wife and I have been friends since high school. I was the one who picked her and your daughter up from the service area after you abandoned them. She was Millie, my old friend, and someone I could always count on. I had called her when I was stranded, asking for help with the trip. What I didn't know was that Millie owned a hotel. When I explained my situation, she surprised me by offering us her hotel accommodation for free. You don't have to worry about paying, Millie had told me at the time. It's the least I can do for you. I was shocked. Back in high school, Millie had struggled with her future. Her family owned a well-known hotel, but she had different dreams. As the only daughter, she felt obligated to take over the business even though it wasn't what she wanted. I had been her shoulder to lean on, encouraging her to follow her heart. Though she ended up managing the hotel, she told me she never forgot how much I supported her during that difficult time. She felt like she owed me a favor and saw this as the perfect opportunity to repay me. I told your husband there's no payment needed, Millie said firmly, but he clearly doesn't care about you. I felt a mix of gratitude and sadness. Millie's kindness reminded me that there were still good people in my life, even as I prepared to let go of my marriage. I don't have a personal connection with you, Millie said firmly. In other words, you're just hotel guests. Since you're only guests, I'd like you to pay the full price for your stay. My husband, caught off guard, tried to argue. All right, look, why don't you put it on your credit card for now, and I'll charge it to my wife later? Millie wasn't having it. I don't want to do that, she replied calmly. It's not that you don't want to, Millie added with a sharp tone. It's that you can't. Isn't that right? My husband's face went pale. Wait, what do you mean? He stammered. Well, Millie explained, your salary is $3,500 a month, and your credit card limit can't be more than $6,000. Isn't that correct? My husband stood frozen, unable to respond. Millie turned to me. He said you're lying about his income. He claimed he had a great salary. I sighed. He's a salesman. He gets incentives when he makes a big sale, but most of the time, he only gets the minimum guaranteed salary. He brags about his income, but the truth is, it's nowhere near enough to pay for something like this. Millie wasn't impressed. Don't tell me you're planning to pay for this out of savings, she said, looking at him sharply. No way, I said before he could speak. That money is for divorce costs, child support, and alimony. What are you talking about? My husband snapped, his voice rising. I filed for divorce, I said, standing tall. You've been threatening me with divorce for years, remember? You always said you'd divorce me anytime. Well, I finally did it. I submitted the papers as fast as I could. He looked stunned. Wait, what? You're serious? Yes. And since we're not married anymore, I don't owe you anything. Not now, not ever. My husband had no choice but to promise Millie he would pay the hotel bill in installments. After that, I contacted an attorney to formally file for custody of my daughter, child support, and alimony. I packed up our belongings and took my daughter back to my parents' house, where we started fresh. Ironically, one of the regular guests at Millie's hotel was an executive from my husband's company. When he found out about the situation, he ordered my ex-husband to pay the full hotel bill immediately. As for my mother-in-law, she was furious when she discovered how little her son earned. She called me, begging me to reconsider the divorce. She wanted her son to support her in the future and couldn't believe I had actually left him. My ex-husband also called me, insisting that Jane needed a father and that we should remarry. I ignored him. Now, my daughter and I are happily living with my parents. Jane is smiling more than ever, and I feel free for the first time in years. There's no way I'm going back to that life. I don't even know what my ex-husband is talking about anymore. He says our daughter needs him, but he never really took care of her anyway. After the divorce, he moved back into his mother's house. At work, things aren't going well for him either. He's not a good planner, so he waited until the last minute to apply for vacation time for that trip. On top of that, the company executive found out that he couldn't even pay for the hotel. Now, his performance and financial issues are common knowledge at work, and he's feeling embarrassed and small. Meanwhile, my life is finally moving in the right direction. Next weekend, my daughter and I are going to stay at the same hotel Millie runs. It's nice to have something to look forward to, especially since I've also started a new job. It's been years since I last worked, but going back to work has been so fulfilling. It's nothing like the draining and one-sided marriage I had. I feel productive and free, building a better future for myself and my daughter. I used to think it was better for children to grow up with both parents under the same roof, but I've learned that's not always true. In our case, it was far better to leave. What really matters is having happy parents who can raise their children in a healthy environment. This divorce has taught me so much. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The most important lesson I've learned is that my daughter will always be my first priority. No matter what challenges come our way, I know I'll always do my best for her. With her by my side, I feel like I can take on anything. She's my biggest source of strength and happiness. Her smile reminds me every day that I made the right decision by walking away from a toxic marriage. I sometimes wonder where people like my ex-husband get their confidence from. He acts so entitled and sure of himself, even when he's clearly in the wrong. Maybe it's just a front to hide his insecurities. Either way, it doesn't matter to me anymore. The divorce was the best decision I've ever made. It gave me the freedom to rebuild my life and give my daughter a better future. Now I can honestly say I'm happy. I'm grateful for my daughter, my supportive friends like Millie, and the second chance I've been given. I hope for a peaceful and happy life for the two of us from now on. My daughter deserves nothing less, and I'll make sure she has the love, security, and support she needs to thrive.
I had always been an early riser. By the time 7:30 a.m. hit, I was usually up, mentally preparing myself for the day. But that day, just as I was getting up, my phone rang. It wasn't the usual work-related call or even one from a friend. It was Mark, my husband. Strange for him to call when he was just in the next room. I picked up. "Hello, Jessica," he stated without any warmth or greeting. "You need to move your stuff out of your room," he continued, his tone firm, almost as if this wasn't up for discussion. Confused, I sat up straighter in bed. "Why would I do that? It's my room," I replied. "Sarah needs it," Mark said. Sarah was Mark's niece, a 25-year-old who had lived a life of ease and reliance on others. She hadn't worked a day in her life, instead choosing to take from her grandparents and anyone else willing to give, including Mark. In her eyes, I was just the stupid auntie, a term she often used behind my back. Why does Sarah need my room? I tried to keep my voice steady, but it trembled with a mix of anger and disbelief. "She's moving in and she wants that room," Mark replied, his tone dismissive. "But that's where all my things are. Where am I supposed to go?" I could feel the sting of tears, but I held them back. "Just find another room or put them in storage. I don't know. Figure it out," Mark said. I was in shock. After everything I had done for this family, this is how he treated me. Our marriage wasn't perfect. In fact, we had been sleeping in separate rooms for a while now, but to be told to vacate my own space in my own home for a girl who had shown me nothing but disrespect was a new low. "Mark, I am not moving my things. That's final," I said firmly. There was a pause. "We'll see about that," Mark replied, and with that, he hung up, leaving me rattled. I sat there for a few moments, trying to process what just happened. Our relationship had its issues, yes, but this blatant disregard for me, for our life together, was something I had never expected. As the weight of the situation settled in, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this stand. Whatever game Mark and Sarah were playing, I had to be ready for it. This was my home, my space, and I wasn't going to be pushed around any longer. I walked through the front door after a grueling day at work, hoping for a moment of peace. But instead, I found Mark and Sarah sitting in the living room, their faces grim. It was clear that my refusal to give up my room had set things into motion. Sarah looked me up and down with a smirk, her arrogance palpable. "So I heard you don't want to give up your room," she said, her voice dripping with mock surprise. "That's right," I responded, my tone firm. "I live here. Sarah, that room is mine," Mark interjected, trying to play peacemaker. "Jessica, can't you just move your stuff to the guest room?" he pleaded. "Why should I? Why does she get my room?" I replied, looking from him to Sarah, who sat smugly, enjoying every moment of my discomfort. "Because she's family and she needs it," Mark answered, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. "I'm your wife, Mark. Or have you forgotten that? I'm family too," I snapped back. Sarah laughed, her voice high-pitched and mocking. "Come on, Auntie Jessica, it's just a room. You can't be that attached to it." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "It's not about the room, Sarah. It's about respect. You can't just come in and demand things as if you own the place," I said firmly. She rolled her eyes. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. All you have to do is move your stuff. Is that so hard?" Mark intervened, raising his hand as if to silence us. "Jessica, just move your stuff. This isn't worth the fight," he pleaded. I stared at him in disbelief. He was my husband. He should have been on my side. Instead, He was sitting with a niece who had repeatedly shown disdain for both him and me. I felt betrayed. Mark, I won't be bullied into giving up my space. Not by you, not by her, I said, pointing at Sarah. This is our home, and I deserve to be treated with respect. Sarah laughed again. Respect? From what I've seen, you don't deserve any. I was taken aback by her audacity. Sarah, you might think you can walk over everyone, but not me. I won't be pushed around, I said with as much dignity as I could muster. Mark sighed, rubbing his temples as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. This is getting us nowhere. Just move your stuff, Jessica, he said. I shook my head. No, I won't. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. The three of us locked in a standoff, each waiting for the other to blink. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Sarah stood up, her face red with anger. Fine, keep your stupid room, but this isn't over, she spat, and with that, she stormed out, leaving me and Mark in an uncomfortable silence. I could tell this was only the beginning of our troubles. The next morning, as I prepared my morning coffee, my phone buzzed with a notification, a text message from an unknown number. I opened it, curious. You should have given me that room. You'll regret crossing me. It read. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I knew instantly who it was from. Sarah, I replied, trying to keep my cool. You don't scare me, Sarah. This is my house, and you can't dictate what happens here. Almost instantly, her reply came in. This isn't over, Auntie Jessica. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Just as I was trying to process this new threat, Mark walked into the kitchen. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes. What's wrong? I asked, showing him the messages. He looked at the screen for a long moment. She's just upset. Don't let her get to you, he said. I frowned. This isn't just being upset, Mark. She's threatening me in our own home. He sighed. I'll talk to her. But you have to understand, she's had a tough life. Losing her parents at a young age wasn't easy. I interrupted him. That doesn't give her the right to behave this way. She's an adult, not a child. Mark looked away, clearly torn between supporting me and defending Sarah. I'll handle it, okay? But the conversation was far from over. That evening, as I was settling into my room, Sarah knocked on the door. I opened it, and she stood there, her posture defiant, eyes cold. Listen, Auntie Jessica, I don't know why you're making things difficult. Just give me the room, and all of this can be over, she said. I took a deep breath. I told you, Sarah, this is my room, my house. You can't come in here and make demands, I replied firmly. She smirked. Maybe not, but I can make life very difficult for you. I looked her straight in the eye. Is that a threat? Sarah leaned in, her voice a low whisper. Consider it a warning. And with that, she turned on her heel and walked away. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The weight of Sarah's warning pressed on me. What was she planning? What was she capable of? And why was Mark so blind to her manipulations? The only thing I knew for sure was that I had to be prepared. Whatever Sarah had in store, I wasn't going down without a fight. Days melded into weeks, and each day seemed grayer than the one before. The walls of the house felt suffocating, and Sarah's smug demeanor was a constant thorn in my side. From leaving unwashed dishes in the sink to borrowing items without asking, she seemed intent on testing my patience. But nothing could have prepared me for the horror that awaited me on one fateful evening. Returning home from work, I immediately sensed something was amiss. The usually locked front door stood slightly ajar. Hesitantly, I pushed it open, half expecting to find a robbery in progress. The living room was untouched, but a trail of torn fabric leading upstairs caught my attention. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I followed the trail to my bedroom. The sight that greeted me was heart-wrenching. My clothes, years of curated outfits, gifts, and personal memories, all cut up and strewn carelessly around. The violation of my personal space was a feeling I couldn't describe. Jessica, what did you do? I heard Mark's voice behind me, dripping with accusation. What did I do? I turned, a mix of disbelief and anger. Your niece did this. Sarah appeared beside him, feigning innocence. Why would I ruin your things, Auntie Jessica? Maybe you did this for attention. Mark looked at me, his gaze colder than I'd ever seen. Did you do this, Jessica? Did you ruin your clothes to frame Sarah? My jaw dropped. You think I would destroy my own things, my cherished memories? Mark's voice grew harsher. Maybe you wanted a reason to kick Sarah out. My heart felt like it was shattering. The man I had once loved and confided in now looked at me like a stranger. I can't believe you'd think that of me, I whispered. Sarah smirked from behind Mark, enjoying every moment of my pain. Maybe you should have just given me the room. None of this would have happened. I backed away, tears streaming down my face. I thought we were a team, Mark. How could you choose her over me? Mark's face was impassive. Maybe if you'd been more understanding, none of this would have happened. You brought this on yourself, he said. The weight of his words was crushing. It was clear I had lost not only my clothes, but also my partner. The realization was devastating. That night, I packed a bag, knowing I couldn't stay in a house where I felt so alone and betrayed. I had lost the battle for the room, but the war for my dignity was just beginning. The weight of the past few weeks felt like 100 bricks pressing down on my chest. Every look, every word exchanged in that house, they all came rushing back. With my bag packed, I sat in the living room, the silence only interrupted by the ticking of the grandfather clock as I waited for a taxi. The realization hit me. This wasn't just about a room, my clothes, or even Sarah. It was about respect, trust, and my place in this family. My phone buzzed, a call from Lisa, my best friend. Hey, Jess, she said, her voice filled with concern. I heard what happened. Are you okay? I don't know, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I feel so lost, Lisa. I never thought Mark would turn on me like this. Lisa sighed. Sometimes people show their true colors when faced with difficult situations. Maybe this was a wake-up call. You're right, I murmured. But what am I going to do now? I've invested so much in this relationship and this house. You need to make a decision for yourself, Lisa advised. For your well-being and your future. Don't let anyone else dictate your worth. Lisa's words resonated deep within me. Mark's parents and Sarah had taken so much from me already. My peace, my happiness, and even my own space. But they couldn't take my self-worth unless I let them. It was time to reclaim it. Determined, I made my way to the bank the next day. As I sat in the financial advisor's office, I explained my situation. I want to ensure that my assets are protected, and I need to know where I stand financially, I said. Mr. Harris, the advisor, nodded sympathetically. We can definitely help with that. Let's review your accounts and see what we can do. As we delved into my finances, it became evident that I was the primary contributor to most of our investments and accounts. Mrs. Thompson, it appears that you've been the major breadwinner here. If you decide to divorce, you have a strong case for a significant portion of these assets, Mr. Harris explained. Divorce. The word felt heavy, yet in a strange way, liberating. Could I really take that step? When I returned home that day, Mark was waiting. Where were you? He asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. I went to the bank, I replied calmly. I needed to review our finances. His face paled. Why? Because, I began, taking a deep breath. I've decided to file for divorce, Mark. I can't be in a relationship where I'm constantly belittled and betrayed. Mark looked stunned. Jess, you're overreacting. We can work things out. I shook my head. No, Mark. This is my decision. I deserve better. And with that, I took the first step towards a new chapter in my life, one where my worth wasn't determined by anyone else but me. A few days later, I found myself seated in the office of a renowned attorney, Miss Angela Reynolds. Her reputation for handling difficult divorce cases was what drew me to her. As I relayed the events that led to my decision, Angela listened attentively. "It's clear that you've been through a lot," Angela commented, jotting down some notes. "I've handled cases like yours before, and I can tell you, standing up for yourself is the best decision you could make." "I just want what's fair," I replied, looking out the window at the bustling city below. "I have supported Mark and his family for so long. It's time for me to protect what's mine," I stated firmly. Angela nodded. "You have a strong case, Jessica, especially given that you've been the primary contributor to your shared assets." I hesitated, then added, "There's something else. I suspect Mark has been unfaithful." Angela looked up, her gaze sharp. "Do you have any proof?" "A private investigator," I began, taking out a folder with photos and notes. "I hired one months ago. The evidence is clear." Angela skimmed through the documents, her expression growing more serious with each page. "This changes things considerably. With evidence of infidelity, the court is likely to view the case in your favor." Relief washed over me, but there was a gnawing feeling at the pit of my stomach. I had to confront Mark with the truth. That evening, I returned home to find Mark in the living room, surrounded by old photo albums, memories of better times. "Jessica," he began, his voice shaky, "I've been thinking maybe we can work things out." I placed the folder on the coffee table, the photos facing up. Mark's face drained of color as he recognized the woman in the photos. "You've been cheating on me," I said calmly, my voice devoid of emotion. Mark's eyes darted between the photos and me. "Jessica, it's not what it looks like." "Save it," I cut him off. "I've known for months, Mark. I just wanted to see if you'd ever come clean." His shoulders slumped in defeat. "Why didn't you confront me sooner?" he asked. "I hoped you'd change," I replied. "But instead, you chose Sarah over me. You let her destroy our home, our trust." Tears streamed down Mark's face. "I'm so sorry, Jessica. I never meant to hurt you." I shook my head. "Sorry doesn't change what you did, Mark. It's over." And just like that, the weight that had been pressing on my chest lifted. It was a painful revelation, but one that set me on a path to reclaiming my life. In the weeks that followed, the legal process was a whirlwind. I felt like a regular at Angela's office, diving deep into the finances and property that Mark and I shared. Mark's actions not only severed our emotional connection, but also jeopardized our shared assets. The evidence of his infidelity and Sarah's destruction of my personal belongings were prominent factors in the proceedings. One morning, I received a call from Angela. "Jessica, I've managed to get a court date. It's sooner than I expected, given the circumstances." "That's great news," I replied, a fire igniting within me. I was ready to see this through. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was filled with tension. Mark sat across from me, looking defeated and tired. Sarah was also present, her arrogant demeanor unchanged. The judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp features, looked through the files presented before her. "It seems the evidence is quite clear," she said. "Infidelity, financial misconduct, and deliberate destruction of property." I caught Mark's gaze, looking for any sign of remorse, but there was only emptiness. Sarah, on the other hand, was fidgeting nervously. Angela, clear and assertive, presented our case. "Your Honor, my client has not only been the primary breadwinner, but has also financially supported Mr. Mark's parents and his niece, Sarah. She's been through emotional trauma and has lost personal belongings due to the actions of the defendants." Mark's lawyer tried to present their side, portraying Mark as a loving husband who was misled by Sarah, but the evidence was overwhelming. After what felt like hours, the judge gave her verdict. In light of the evidence presented and the actions of Mr. Mark and Miss Sarah, the court rules in favor of Miss Jessica. I exhaled deeply, feeling a wave of relief. It was a victory, not just legally, but also personally. I was reclaiming my life. Outside the courtroom, Sarah approached me, her bravado gone. "Jessica, I'm sorry," she began, her voice quivering. "I never thought things would go this far." "Your actions have consequences, Sarah," I replied coldly. "It's time you learned that." Mark tried to catch my attention, but I walked past him. There was no room for reconciliation. I had given him chances before, and he had thrown them away. It was time for both of us to face the outcomes of our choices. Retribution, it seemed, was finally mine. Spring's rejuvenating spirit mirrored the changes in my life. Gone were the gloomy days in the big, suffocating house. Now I enjoyed the city views from a modern apartment, a fresh start, and a place of my own. My morning routine was interrupted by a call. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen, but I had a hunch. Taking a deep breath, I answered. "Jessica, it's me, Mark," he stammered. I stiffened. "Why are you calling, Mark?" His voice, a mix of desperation and hope, came through. "Things have changed, Jessica. I realize now how wrong I was. Everything's fallen apart since you left. I was wondering—" "Get to the point," I said curtly. "I need you, Jessica," he blurted out. "Financially, everything's a disaster. Sarah took advantage of my bank accounts, ran up huge debts. We had to move in with my parents. They sold the house to cover her debts, and now we're all squeezed together, constantly fighting over money." A bitter smile formed on my lips. "So, you're calling because you want help. Money?" "Not just that," he pleaded. "I want you back, Jessica. I made a huge mistake." I took a moment, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. "Mark, while I sympathize with your situation, you made your choices. I've moved on, and you need to find your own way now." Before he could respond, another voice piped up in the background. Auntie, help me out just once. I promise I'll change." It was Sarah, her voice sounding very different from the arrogant and demanding tone I remembered. I sighed deeply. "Sarah, I hope you find the path to change truly, but it's not my responsibility to fix the consequences of your actions." The call ended with a heavy silence. It was difficult hearing their desperation, but I knew I had to stand firm to rebuild myself. I had let go of the toxicity that once consumed me. There was no turning back. As the days turned into months, I immersed myself in my work, found joy in little things, and adopted a playful cat named Bella. Life had its challenges, but it also presented beautiful moments of growth and contentment. One evening, while reflecting on the past, I realized that despite the pain, those experiences shaped me into a stronger, wiser woman. I felt an inner peace, knowing that after every storm, a new dawn awaits. And as the sun set that day, I embraced my new life, grateful for the journey and the lessons it brought.
"You should have handed over control when Dad passed." Brielle's voice cut through the noise like a knife through butter. "This is our chance to sell and make a real profit." My heart stuttered as I peered around the corner, spotting my cousin deep in conversation with Ethan, my fiancé of 3 years. They huddled near the bar, oblivious to my eavesdropping presence at our winery's annual harvest party. "I'm in," Ethan murmured with a solemn nod. "We'll tell Avery after securing the deal. She won't be able to refuse once the money's on the table." Bile rose in my throat as the truth slammed into me. My own family, my supposed loved ones, plotting to steal away my father's life's work, everything I'd sacrificed to preserve. Trembling, I stormed away, desperate for space to process the gut-wrenching betrayal. Tears blurred my vision as I fled through the vineyard's rows, the muffled sounds of celebration fading behind me. How could they, after all the blood, sweat, and tears I'd poured into this place? into keeping Dad's dream alive. And Ethan? The man I'd planned to marry, willing to strip me of my legacy for profit. The vines stretched endlessly in every direction, mirroring the tangled maze of shock and rage clawing at my chest. I stumbled forward, uncaring of the twigs snagging my dress or the chill night air whipping across my face. It wasn't until I reached the secluded corner where Dad's favorite rosebush grew that I finally crumpled to the ground in anguished sobs. The petals glistened with dew, oblivious to my shattering world. After several ragged breaths, determination replaced despair. I wouldn't go down without a fight. Not while a single drop of my father's spirit flowed through these vines. If Ethan and Brielle wanted a war for the winery's soul, they'd soon discover I possessed more metal than they could ever fathom. Fueled by righteous fury, I rose and marched with renewed purpose back toward the celebration. Ethan and Brielle would never see the tempest brewing behind my controlled smile as I rejoined the crowd. Let them bask in their misguided confidence. It would make their downfall all the more catastrophic. I was the master of this vineyard, and by night's end, I'd have the perfect scheme to protect Dad's legacy at all costs. In the days following the harvest party, I played the role of the oblivious fiancé to perfection. Ethan remained affectionate, his gentle kisses and soft caresses mere rehearsed performances masking his deceit. "How was your meeting with the marketing team?" he asked over dinner one evening, his hazel eyes betraying not a glimmer of guilt. I forced a smile. "Productive. We've got some exciting new campaigns in the works." Ethan nodded, shoveling a forkful of pasta into his mouth. "That's great, babe. I know how hard you've been working to take the winery to new heights." The blatant hypocrisy nearly made me gag. While he spouted meaningless platitudes, I secretly gathered evidence, piecing together the full extent of his treachery with Brielle. Tapping into the winery's financial records and encrypted communications, I discovered their embezzlement stretched back months, funds they'd been funneling into an offshore account. Printouts detailing dozens of wire transfers lay scattered across my office desk like damning puzzle pieces. My blood boiled as I connected their illicit money trail to meetings with corporate bigwigs, vultures eager to devour my family's legacy. "You lying, grasping snakes," I seethed through gritted teeth. The office door creaked open, and Lucia, my most trusted employee, stepped in with a concerned frown. "Everything okay, Miss Connors?" I waved her inside and gestured to the documents. "See for yourself. My dear fiancé and cousin have been stabbing us in the back for months, setting up a sale to that blood-sucking conglomerate we've been fighting off." Lucia's eyes widened in horror as she scanned the records. "Those maneuvers, how could they?" "Greed and self-preservation," I spat. "Ethan's likely counting on making me the rank-and-file winery bitch once the deal is done." I slammed my fist on the desk, delighting in Lucia's startled flinch. "But they're gravely mistaken if they think I'll roll over without bringing the entire facade crumbling down on their heads." Lucia swallowed hard, her voice wavering. "What are you going to do?" A wicked grin stretched across my face as the seeds of vengeance took root. "I'm going to remind them why you don't dispense with honor among thieves." The next morning, I strode into Marcia Blackwood's prestigious law office, evidence folder in hand. If anyone could help dismantle Ethan and Brielle's underhanded scheme, it was Marcia, a brilliant legal shark with a reputation for devouring corporate sleazeballs. "Miss Connors," her assistant ushered me inside. "Miss Blackwood is expecting you." I found the renowned attorney studying a stack of documents behind her imposing mahogany desk. Razor-sharp eyes scrutinized me over the rim of her glasses as I approached. "You certainly have a flair for dramatic entrances," Marcia said dryly. "I hope, for your sake, you've brought me something substantial." Wordlessly, I handed over the folder and waited as she flipped through the incriminating paperwork. Bank statements, encrypted emails, everything I'd compiled on the betrayal. Marcia's practiced mask of stoicism slipped, her eyebrows arching in disbelief. "This is unbelievable. Your own family conspiring against you in broad daylight." I stifled the urge to snap. Try having that realization slap you across the face. Instead, I simply nodded. "Can you help me take them down?" My voice remained steady, devoid of the raging storm churning beneath my composed exterior. "I want to bury Ethan and Brielle under the full weight of legal and public retribution." A predatory glint flickered in Marcia's eyes, the look of a tiger scenting blood on the wind. "Oh, I'll do more than that, Miss Connors. By the time we're through, their reputations and freedom will be torn asunder. They'll be left destitute, forced to slink away from this valley with their tails between their legs." My lips curved into a vindictive smile, already envisioning the devastation I'd rain down upon the traitorous snakes slithering in my midst. Over the ensuing days, Marcia and I constructed an impenetrable counteroffensive, rallying allies in preparation to obliterate Ethan and Brielle's scheme. Anthony, my winery's head vintner, eagerly supplied information to undermine their corporate dealings. Jackson, our top sales rep, helped divert funds and reroute profitable distribution contracts. Kara in marketing launched a campaign showcasing our heritage and community ties, the very soul they aimed to ravage for profit. With each Ailey recruited and asset secured, the day of reckoning crept inexorably closer. Ethan and Brielle carried on clueless, their arrogance blinding them to the crumbling ground beneath their feet. I could hardly wait to cement the trapdoor's collapse and revel in their pathetic, well-deserved downfall. The first strike hit with precise, surgical brutality. This just in. Financial records have surfaced exposing embezzlement and corporate fraud at Connor Family Vineyards, the local news anchor announced in a grave tone. Sources indicate Chief Marketing Officer Ethan Baxter and Deputy Manager Brielle Evans have been funneling company assets into overseas accounts for personal gain. I watched with wicked satisfaction as the damning report flashed on the TV, my finger hovering over the pause button. Frozen on screen, Ethan and Brielle's faces contorted in horror. A perfect captured memory. In the ensuing days, a merciless barrage of legal filings and media leaks descended upon the conspirators. Marcia worked tirelessly, slapping them with criminal charges while ensuring every salacious allegation dominated headlines. Ethan confronted me in a heated parking lot showdown, his usually polished veneer cracked and disheveled. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded through clenched teeth, eyes wild and desperate. "We were going to set you up with a nice payoff, more than enough to retire comfortably." I laughed in his face, loud and mocking. "And let you thieves bleed my father's legacy dry? Spend his life's work on foosball tables and degenerate thrill-seeking?" The venom in my tone seemed to shrink him before my very eyes. "You deluded yourself into thinking I'd just hand over the keys and walk away once the money hit my account, that I'd forsake my responsibilities, my duties as Connor heir." Poking his chest with each enunciated word, I leaned until our faces were mere inches apart. "You miscalculated. Badly." Ethan recoiled, his expression incredulous. "So that's it? You'd rather watch everything burn than compromise?" Meeting his gaze with frigid certainty, I replied, "Some legacies are worth martyring over." With that, I spun on my heel and strutted away, leaving him to stew in his shattered delusions. The next phase hit hard and fast, a series of surgical strikes systematically sabotaging Ethan and Brielle's corporate dealings. One by one, their underhanded business negotiations unraveled in spectacular fashion. Within days, the Vineyard conglomerate abruptly pulled their buyout offer after our PR blitzkrieg portrayed us as a historic community anchor, the embodiment of Napa's proud heritage they'd never uproot without a customer backlash. All its posturing about market share and consolidation swiftly crumbled in the face of such toxic optics. Other potential investors fled like scattering roaches in the light, terrified of being labeled corporate pillagers. With their options dwindling, Ethan and Brielle found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn, each frantic move, born of arrogance and desperation, easily anticipated and deflected. Soon they'd have nowhere left to squirm except directly into the pit of consequences I'd meticulously excavated. I could already envision them dangling on the precipice, one fateful shove from total disgrace and ruin. With Ethan and Brielle's scheme to sell the winery lying in ruins, it was time to set the final stage for my grand defiance. I'd lured the snakes into a corner, now to spring the trap and crush them beneath my heel once and for all. The annual Winemakers Charity Gala presented the perfect opportunity. A high-profile event with investors, media, and industry bigwigs from across the valley in attendance. Precisely the backdrop I needed to thoroughly humiliate the treacherous fools threatening my legacy. "You wanted to speak with me?" Ethan sidled up beside me, his expression a pathetic mask of defeat and confusion. Behind him, Brielle hovered nearby, shoulders slumped in dejected resignation. I regarded them both with callous appraisal. Yes, there's an important matter we need to discuss at the gala tonight, a major announcement regarding the winery's future. Ethan's brow furrowed as he processed my words. You mean? Exactly. I allowed a calculated pause, lips curving into a razor-thin smile. I think it's time I abdicated control and allowed the next generation to steer Connor Vineyards forward, with all our supporters present to bear witness. His features slackened in apparent relief, and I had to stifle a derisive snort. If only he knew the profound depths of his delusion. I don't know what to say, he stammered out. Thank you for finally seeing reason, Avery. I promise Brielle and I will make you proud with the new direction. Save your platitudes. I cut him off with a dismissive wave. Just be prepared to embrace your role on the stage tonight. It'll be a performance neither of you will ever forget. As the gala commenced a few hours later, tension simmered just beneath the celebratory surface. Ethan and Brielle worked the crowds with artificial cheer, confidence buoyed by hubris and ignorance. They fully expected this evening to mark their ascension as winery overloads, a private victory party attended by the entire valley's elite. Little did the self-deluded fools realize the event heralded loss-doomed downfall, orchestrated by the very woman they sought to disenfranchise. Their humiliation would be gloriously public, a final legacy-staining trauma to complement the mountain of legal consequences still to come. Enjoying the evening? I sidled up to them with 2 fresh glasses of crisp Chardonnay, every inch the gracious hostess. Brielle accepted her drink, green eyes glinting with avarice. It's just the start of many more to come under our management. About that. I raised my glass in preparation for a toast. I believe I promised a special announcement tonight. Ethan's face broke into an eager grin, gobbling up the bait with reckless desperation. You finally saw the light. We're ready to lead the winery into a new prosperous era. Seizing the moment, I strode up onto the stage and seized the microphone, my voice amplifying across the hushed ballroom with authority. Esteemed guests, as many of you know, this gala celebrates not just the year's harvest, but the bonds of community, heritage, and family. I paused, letting the pregnant silence saturate the air like a heavy fog. Therefore, it is with great dismay I must reveal there are snakes in our midst. Pitching my voice to drip with disdain, I turned a piercing glare upon Ethan and Brielle's ashen faces. Snake who've been siphoning profits into offshore accounts and orchestrating an illegal sale to corporate raiders, all in a selfish ploy to steal what isn't theirs. The room erupted in shocked gasps and furious murmurs. Ethan gaped at me in abject horror, his knees visibly trembling. Score 1 for catching the rats by surprise. But take heart, my friends, I continued, allowing a vindicated smile. For I've spent months unraveling this scheme and constructed a righteous counterattack to preserve the heart and soul of Connor Vineyards. And as we speak, law enforcement is en route to apprehend the conspirators and abate this betrayal once and for all. That caused another thunderous roar to swell, this one of cheers and applause from the assembled guests. Ethan and Brielle could only stand frozen, their traitorous aspirations rejected in the most grandiose, humiliating forum imaginable. This was more than just the death of their scheme, it was the public immolation of their dreams, their reputations irrevocably stained for all to witness. Smile widening to bask in their torment, I locked eyes with Ethan, allowing my voice to rise above the raucous din in one final damning declaration. And so ends the inglorious paths of those foolish enough to betray Connor Family Vineyards. The silence that followed my declaration was electric, charged with 1,000 unvoiced gasps and accusations. Every eye in the gala burned into Ethan and Brielle, the snakes exposed in their traitorous coils. Clutching the microphone, I drank in the moment, savoring their abject humiliation as event security closed in to apprehend them. There would be no escape, no last-minute reprieve to salvage their crumbling reputations. You lying bitch! Brielle exploded first, always the blazing tempest to Ethan's simmering tumult. Flecks of spittle flew from her snarling lips as she wheeled on me in impotent rage. How dare you? After everything our family sacrificed to build this place up from nothing. A cruel laugh burst from my chest. mocking and utterly devoid of mercy. Sacrificed? I echoed back at her venomous glare. By stealing and scheming behind my back to rob me of my rightful inheritance? If that's the extent of your sacrifices, then allow me to return the favor. Sweeping an arm out, I gestured to the assembled crowd staring in scandalized fascination. Esteemed guests, I give you Brielle Evans and Ethan Baxter, a contemptible pair of vipers who not only embezzled funds and orchestrated an illegal sale, but deluded themselves into thinking I'd simply hand over my legacy to their greedy clutches once the money hit my accounts. A fresh torrent of gasps and whispers rippled through the room, judgment and damnation raining down on the exposed snakes. No corner of this prestigious venue would offer them refuge, only the unforgiving glare of a community outraged by their insidious betrayal. Well, here's your wake-up call. I locked eyes with the fuming Brielle, jaw clenched to savor her swift descent into panicked realization. The Connors don't fold to snakes or sell our souls so easily. We have a pride and resilience that parasites like you could never comprehend. Dismissing her with a contemptuous sneer, I turned my scathing address toward the squirming Ethan. And you, my so-called husband-to-be, orchestrating a con to strip me of everything I've sacrificed for. Tell me, were you even attempting to mask your disloyalty, or just stringing me along like a blissfully ignorant puppet? Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but any protest withered on his ashen lips beneath my blistering glare. Save your platitudes, we both know the truth. You saw an opportunity for an easy payday. Damn whoever's lives or legacies got chewed up along the way. My fingers stabbed with each enunciated syllable, driving the humiliation deeper. Well, you miscalculated badly, Baxter, and now you'll reap the widespread ruination you've disgraced yourselves by earning. As if on cue, the ballroom doors flew open, revealing a grim-faced Marcia Blackwood flanked by county sheriff's deputies, the legal cavalry arriving to compound the conspirators' devastation. They swept forward as twin tidal waves of dread finally crested over Ethan and Brielle's masks of feigned innocence. Excuses and justifications died on their lips, choked off by the stark ramifications crashing down upon their elaborately orchestrated scheme. Ethan turned to me, momentarily unmasked in his desperation. "Avery, please." But I cut him off with a contemptuous slash of my hand. "I don't know who you are anymore, Ethan. Only that you're just another snake unworthy of my name or legacy." His shoulders slumped just before the deputies seized his arms, the dual blows of exposure and consequence robbing him of any final defiance. Fighting back a cruel smirk of satisfaction, I handed off the microphone to the approaching Marcia and stood tall, basking in the complete conquest over those who dared imperil everything I held sacred. The sight of Ethan and Brielle being led away in shackles amid a chorus of infuriated shouts branded itself into my memory like a searing brand. A watershed moment, their pathetic hopes and conniving snuffed out, the battlefield belonging solely to the righteous victor once more. In the days following the gala, a torrential downpour of consequences deluged Ethan and Brielle's shattered world. The dominoes I'd meticulously lined up for months toppled in devastating, unrelenting succession. First came the media crucifixion, a full-court blitz of skating exposés that left no damning stone unturned. Embezzlement figures, paper trails of illicit deals, and every unsavory allegation flooded the airwaves and newspapers. Then, the corporate clients and investors rapidly distanced themselves from the toxic fallout. Distributors and joint ventures severed ties as if the conniving snakes had developed a virulent, untreatable plague. Lucrative contracts evaporated overnight, closing off any potential lifelines or escape routes. Within a week, the once burgeoning empire Ethan and Brielle envisioned lay smoldering on the funeral pyre of their treacherous designs. Watching the dominoes spiral from my winery office's floor-to-ceiling windows, I sipped a crisp Chardonnay, smoky undertones from the Heritage Vineyards crop complemented by the sweetness of hard-earned vindication. "It's all crumbling apart for them out there," Lucia murmured, mirroring my hawkish gaze. "Just like you said it would." "Of course." I swirled the glass, observing the pale liquid's lazy eddies. "Snakes like Ethan and Brielle slither on instinct and impulse. They can't help reverting to their vile natures. Snakes need to be defanged and rendered harmless before they can contaminate the surrounding environment." Lucia's brow furrowed as she processed my detached analysis. And you're just okay with doing that to your own cousin? Your ex-fiancé? A wintry smirk tugged at the corners of my lips. I am the master of this vineyard, Lucia. Those sorts of personal entanglements and sentiments are luxuries I cannot afford to entertain, not when the stakes are so monumental. Shaking her head slowly, she shifted her gaze back outside. I don't know how you have the stomach for it. All this, coldly dismantling their lives. It's not about vengeance or settling scores, I replied evenly. This was always about upholding the values and legacy my father imparented upon these vines. Some degradation simply cannot be allowed to take root. A brief lull stretched between us as the enormity of the situation resonated. After a few thoughtful sips, I broke the silence. We're in the final throes now. Ethan and Brielle's reputations are decimated beyond repair, their underhanded ambitions rendered stillborn. My finger traced the path of a large truck pulling away from a nearby warehouse, the last dribbles being siphoned off their illicit overseas accounts and asset seizures. Soon, their ill-gotten windfalls will be returned to their rightful place, and they'll be left as they began, common graspers stripped of all influence and credibility. A grim smile etched across my features as I envisioned them reaping the whirlwind of their own making. No prison could confine them as completely as the reputations and futures they'd willingly immolated on the altar of greed and treachery. Every eye would forever gaze upon them and see only the parasites who betrayed family and legacy for a quick payday, irredeemable snakes expelled from their padded Eden into the wilderness of permanent societal exile. A more comprehensive immolation than anything I could have orchestrated by sheer force of will. It's the perfect karmic justice, I declared, clinking my glass against Lucia's in a muted toast. They'll never hold power or influence in this valley or respected circles ever again. As the crystal chimed, my gaze drifted over the sprawling vineyards basking in the valley's reflected emerald glow. The spark of renewal and reinvigoration already gathered on the horizon, possibilities blossoming like a new bountiful harvest yet to be plucked. My family's righteous legacy endured, burnished anew while the snakes shriveled and expired, warnings to any who dared stake foolish claims against its roots. I would ensure the winery's spiritual heart stemmed strong and proud in the aftermath. This land and its fruits would continue upholding the honored Connor's name long after Ethan and Brielle faded from memory like the meaningless parasites they were. Order had been restored, karmic balance achieved with a ruthless, defensive precision. In the aftermath of Ethan and Brielle's disgrace, an unsettled quiet descended upon the vineyards, the calm before a new season of growth and rebirth took root. I stood alone amid the pruned vines, calloused fingers tracing the gnarled bark, as the first whispers of spring's rejuvenation danced on the crisp morning breeze. The heady, fertile scents served as a poignant reminder of the perpetual cycles governing our world. Decay always preceded new life flourishing from the fallow remnants. Closing my eyes, I inhaled deeply and permitted myself a faint, rueful smile. Ethan and Brielle were experiencing that harsh transition now, reaping the bitter harvest they'd sown through arrogance and betrayal. Once vitally connected to this sacred valley's lifeblood, they now found themselves permanently severed, withered husks left behind as the next evolution in Connor Vineyards progressed without them. You look entirely too philosophical for someone clutching pruning shears. Anthony's gruff voice shook me from my reverie. I cracked open one eye to find the cantankerous old vintner shuffling up beside me, shotgun slung over his shoulder in his usual curmudgeonly fashion. Just savoring the turning of seasons, I replied, nodding toward the replenished vines already studding with pale green buds, contemplating the cycles that govern all aspects of life. Anthony snorted, hawking a thick globule of phlegm into the pristine soil. If you're searching for some grand metaphor about your jackass ex-fiancé and money-grubbing cousin, you're barking up the wrong goddamn vineyard. I fought back a chuckle, recognizing Anthony's typical bluster. Not at all, I assured him, merely appreciating the moments of peace and clarity before we dive headlong into another demanding harvest. The brusque old man gave a grudging nod, squinting out over the sea of vibrant green shoots stretching toward the horizon. Well, at least you finally evicted those parasitic rats mucking about in the wine cellar, he growled. spat enough dealing with aphids and mildew without vermin infestations threatening to strangle the whole operation. His crass wisdom struck an unexpected chord of sanguine appreciation within me. Somehow, Anthony's earthy pragmatism invoked the spirit of these lands more than any fragrant spring zephyr or poetic Renaissance musings could muster. Some legacies endured not through florid romanticisms, but by the hard-bitten determination to preserve their essence through every cycle of death and rebirth. Dad had that stubborn tenacity, and now, in the aftermath of my own battle to safeguard our proudest fruits, it seemed I had awoken to it as well. Nodding toward the distant winery complex peeking over the knolls, I voiced the conviction blossoming in my chest. I want to expand our attractions and hospitality ventures, I declared. Lavish new visitor experiences to take this place to even greater heights. Show the world we're not some quaint foothill boutique, but a leading cultural anchor as timeless as the grapes we cultivate. Anthony regarded me with one bushy-thing eyebrow arched. Mighty ambitious talk, Miss Connor. A cantankerous smirk tugged at the corner of his cracked lips. Hope you've got the grit to back it up once the snakes come slithering back. My fingers tightened around the pruning shear's worn wooden grip, drawing reassuring strength from its hewn permanence. I'm counting on it, I replied with a feral grin. The vines and soil have tasted treachery. They'll never allow anything besides the purest offerings to take nourishment again. Let the serpents bare their fangs, we'll simply lop off their skulls and continue flourishing as we were meant to. Anthony held my gaze for a long moment before unleashing a gravely chuckle that reverberated across the peaceful vineyard like a rollicking thunderclap. Well, I'll be damned, he sputtered between wheezing guffaws. You've finally grown a nice pair of auteur Italian grapes, haven't you, girl? My laughter joined his, the twin reverberations mingling and trilling through the awakening vines, harbingers of the revitalized spirit and enterprise taking root. As our mirth gradually subsided into a comfortable quiet, I gazed out over my family's verdant domain with a renewed sense of purpose igniting within. No longer would I merely aim to preserve these hallowed lands. That passive existence felt unbefittingly hollow in the wake of my trials. From the ashes of duplicity and desecration, a new, more ambitious path beckoned to be forged. One that would elevate Connor Vineyards to unprecedented glories and esteem its founder could scarcely have envisioned. But I sensed Dad's spirit smiling down upon the endeavor, regardless, for he would surely recognize the resilience and singular drive propelling his heir's ascent from turmoil to triumph. The snakes had been vanquished. Now it was time for the phoenix to stretch its wings and soar toward new promised harvests.